Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ingrid.
Good morning, Richard.
Welcome, everybody, to our third B2B sales clinic webinar. It's great to see you. You're out and about in Melbourne today?
I am. I'm in Toorak Road in South Yarra. So forgive me for the background noise, guys. Trams and dogs.
So we've got people coming into the meeting as we're starting. I think just bearing in mind that we've got time allocation, let's start things off and go from there. So today the webinar is about 2021 being the year of recovery, and after what happened last year with the pandemic, lockdowns in multiple areas and multiple occasions, it was a really tough year, but companies more and more are now starting to put pressure on salespeople and sales teams to deliver results that are back up at the pre-COVID levels. And what we wanted to talk about is what that means for salespeople, what it means for sales teams, sales managers, and where does it leave the sales department in 2021? So Ingrid, if you don't mind, I'm going to start off by asking you a couple of questions because I know you're passionate on this subject. And the first question I've got for you is, what are the two things that sales leaders have or should have at the forefront of their minds this year?
Yeah, well, I just think that this topic's so relevant. And it is all about recovery. But the two things that I think they need to really have at the top of their mind is just getting their pipeline values back. So what happened last year, the smart salespeople just wrung out what was left in their sales pipelines, realised that and managed to hit targets and in some cases even beat target last year. But that left it quite empty. And so it's really the replenishment of pipeline for this year. Now that sounds like it's pretty straightforward, and yet because, you know, for a lot of the people that are on our webinar, their sales cycles might be 6-12 months. So, you know, to get busy again, the second part of that focus really is activity levels. So you really need your salespeople out and about, meeting people in person, absolutely, if possible now, because if we do go into further lockdowns this year, which, look, it's on the cards, and it might only be for a day here or 5 days there, but what that does is it interrupts the flow of face-to-face meetings. And so while we can, we really need to be in front of people so that we're establishing those relationships in person now, so that when we need to, if we need to, pick them up down the track and have meetings online or speak with people on the phone, we've got that initial face-to-face relationship already developed. So pipeline value, and when I say pipeline value, I mean 2 to 3 times the value of what their sales target is at any given stage in their pipeline, and then getting people back out there busy.
So what you're saying there is, if a salesperson has a target of $10,000 a month, or let's call it $120,000 or $100,000 a year, they should have what sort of value of leads in their pipeline? Yeah. What was the value?
So yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's incredibly conservative there. I think that 3 times the value is really what we should be aiming for.
Yeah, right.
Because then it just gives you that flexibility, and you know that you're going to really achieve that. So if your annual target was $100,000, then you need 300,000 sitting in there. So that means that as you start to realise those sales, you need to keep replenishing and adding more into the pipeline. So it just really keeps salespeople on target so that there's a rolling opportunity base.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. And I guess some people are still waiting for normal pre-COVID to return before they ramp things up and get things going. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, it's just that's really common. For some salespeople, they just really thought that they'd ride it out and come, you know, this year would tick over and they'd be back to normal. And that meant for them that they could go out and do the face-to-face again. People would be back in the office. And we're finding very quickly that that's absolutely not the case. So while we can meet with people in person, most people still aren't in the office full-time. That might be their part-time. But for a lot of people, they're meeting people in cafes because it's the only opportunity to meet in person. So if you're waiting for it to go back to the way it was, you're going to get left behind. It's as simple as that. So it's really about understanding your world. And when I say your world, I mean your market, your customer base, their customer base, the issues, your competitors, what they're doing, and how things have really changed in light of the year that all of those industries had last year. And understanding, therefore, what this year needs to look like and how you can make sure that you're relevant and therefore of value to your customers, in this new environment. So it's really important to understand that the world has changed. It may or may not ever go back. Let's assume that it's not, and get used to this new world and then upskill yourself so that you can work effectively in this new environment.
Yeah, good point. And what is the shift in the market that salespeople must adjust to then in order to have impact this year?
Yeah, there's two things. So you might have heard of, working smarter, not harder, in the past. Well, this year, salespeople have to work smarter and harder just to get the same outcomes. Let me give you an example. And this is a statistic that that's been shared with me from about 3 or 4 different clients. And when that happens, it tells me that that's actually a theme or a trend that is probably more of a norm. And that is that it takes 8 calls, and usually 8 times the level of activity to get the same result this year or in this kind of context than it did beforehand, say 2019. And so when you think about that, you think, wow, gosh, it's a lot more activity. So that's fine, but just simply working harder is not going to cut it. So what I mean by working smarter as well is understanding the balance and getting the balance right between face-to-face meetings when you can, and then also how you kind of slot in online. So in this kind of forum, whether that be Zoom or Teams or WebEx or any of those sorts of mechanisms. My apologies, there's a massive cleaning truck in the background. But really understanding that you can use those tools to your advantage. So they save a lot of time. And we've talked about this before, Richard, I think in previous webinars that we've done, about adding on those 2 extra meetings per day in an online forum or on the phone, which means really it's an extra 10 a week, 500 meetings a year or 500 conversations. So if you work cleverly, you can really do a lot more in this environment because now this is part of the way that we work, so it's accepted. But I come back to the fact that we're going to really count on relationships. Trust is an absolute premium. It really is the new currency, in my opinion. And I know that that's always been important. Of course it has. But it's even more important now because everything else is so uncertain. And so if we can be that constant as salespeople and as consulting providers to our customers, then it becomes I can't take a drink. And then the final thing that I would share with everyone is that we've got a phenomenon now that's, so when we were in the office beforehand as salespeople, we could get away with looking like we were doing the work. But now I'm phrasing it as output over optics. And what I mean by that is it's about the quality of your work, it's about the value that it brings to the organisation, and you can't hide behind just looking like you're coming in early, leaving late, working through lunches, saying all the right things, showing up at a sales meeting in a certain way. We really need to produce the results. And so the people that have gotten away with that in the past, they just won't survive in this environment. And the people who are just, steady as she goes, just working consistently, but harder and smarter, they're the ones that will really thrive.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really good point that you made earlier about salespeople often were able to hit targets or get very close to target by wringing out all of the potential that's in their current pipeline. But unfortunately, that then leaves them with very little opportunity now coming into this year. So that whilst they may have performed well through the pandemic and up till now, they're going to hit a slump if they don't do things differently. Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, you're muted, Ingrid.
Sorry, I just thought I'd... I'd kind of mitigate some of the background noise there. So my apologies there, but no, that's absolutely true. And I think that, you know, when it comes to this year, you know, we've talked about before, you know, the reality of, you know, using technology better, and we can. So let's make the most of it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much.
That's all right. So it's my turn to ask you some questions, and I promise I will mute myself as you're answering.
Right.
So, Richard, one of the questions that I had for you is, you know, we talked about targets moving back to, you know, 2019 levels, because companies need to recover financially. Of course they do. But the problem is that the market isn't at a pre-2019 level. So customers are working from home, some are working rotating shifts to work from the office, and some industries have shrunk, others have grown exponentially. Where do you think that leaves salespeople?
Look, I think you're absolutely right. Things are harder in many ways. I tend to try to be the optimist with this and say, well, okay, what are the opportunities? And I think there are some really good opportunities. Now, there are some industries that have been hit very hard and others that haven't. But I think that the same opportunities exist across the board. And the biggest one is something you alluded to earlier, which is that more meetings are now being held online, sales calls, sales meetings, and that's a big saving in time. So I think that the big opportunity for salespeople this year is to be able to use that time in a smart way to try and make more of their meetings online. They tend to be 30, 40, 50% shorter anyway when they're online than if they're face-to-face. You have no driving back and forwards. So if you're getting the time back, there's a great expression that work fills the time available, and it's very easy to go, yeah, I'm only doing 5 meetings, I'm still doing 5 meetings a day, I've got a lot more time back, but I'm actually not accomplishing anymore. So I think the big opportunity is for salespeople to focus on activity and use that time back to build activity in their sales funnel, because activity drives the results at the end of the day. So if they can bring more leads into their sales pipeline, they're going to make more sales. If the salesperson stays the same, if the quality of leads stays the same, then simply increasing the number of people that they talk to, quality prospects, is going to mean more opportunities mean more sales, and that's going to build their results. So I think the big opportunity is there, but it doesn't apply just to salespeople who are going out and dealing with new clients. It's also for your account management team, if they're also used to going out and servicing clients and they can now do that online from the office. They have more time, which means they can contact their existing customers more often, but more importantly, they can reach into that very important but often overlooked large tail of, or long tail of clients who are small. Individually, they don't make a great deal of impact, but together they can account for maybe 50-60% of the company's turnover. So using that time to talk to those prospects, those customers, and to service them more often. Often you might find actually a company that I thought was a very small account is a very big one. We've just got a very small share of wallet. But that comes from having those conversations. So I think that's the big opportunity, I think, even though things are harder, is to increase activity each day and each week.
Yeah, it's really, I love what you've just said. I mean, obviously I do. You know, you're singing to the choir here with me, and I'm sure that the people who are watching and listening, you know, completely agree with that as well. And I think that if we use, so we talked about technology before, and we talked about Zoom taking less time. Absolutely it does. And so using that for those follow-up conversations, like you said, to build deeper insight across your existing accounts to grow better share of wallet, and once you've met with somebody in person, if you've had that opportunity, to then, you know, have outcome-driven conversations all the way through. I think you've absolutely nailed it, Richard.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all right. So, why do you think that some companies have succeeded, during COVID, while others haven't? And what should sales teams do now as we recover from the pandemic?
I think that the mistake that some companies made, for whatever reason they made it, and there are probably very good reasons for it, was they stopped their sales and marketing activity, or they reduced it, or they cut back, and they didn't put as much time on the new activity. So as you touched on earlier, I can still make my sales by working my existing pipeline, but that's going to leave a shortfall down the track. We saw this, we lost a fair number of clients when lockdown happened last April, I'll call it. But we had companies who stuck by us. And the interesting thing, I've said this before, the interesting thing is when I looked at the results we achieved for them during April, May, and June, and compared that with the results we achieved for them in January and February, well, no, February, because January is a little bit slow. In February, we made 56% more appointments for them in the same amount of time during lockdown. And so what happened, I think people thought it's probably not a good time to be talking to people, I won't bother. So they got out of the market. The companies who have succeeded in each market have been the ones, in my opinion, who have stuck at their sales and marketing. They've really kept a focus on that. In some cases, they've increased the amount that they've done, but they have not conceded the market to their competitors. They've been there. They've been the voice that people are hearing, the people that they're seeing, and so they have succeeded. So you can't do anything about that. If the decision last year was we're cutting back on sales spending, marketing spending, etc., you can't do anything about that now. What you can do, though, is come back strong into the market, and many companies are doing that. But I would say it's about ramping up sales and marketing activity to give higher numbers. As you said earlier, if you can have 3 times your pipeline in your or value of your sales target in your pipeline, you're going to be on a really good run for hitting your targets. So that's what every salesperson and every sales manager needs to be looking at, is what is the activity that I need to drive to make sure all of my salespeople have that volume and that number of opportunities in their pipeline. And that comes down to purely and simply prospecting. Now, prospecting can be the sort of work that we do, but it can also be the amount that's being spent on AdWords and online marketing. It can be LinkedIn, it can be events, it can be all sorts of other things that you're doing. But you need to be, in my opinion, everywhere that your prospective customer is, so that they just think that you're everywhere. You're not actually everywhere, you're just everywhere that they are, and you're talking to them and building a profile. So the faster you can get back into that kind of mentality and driving the activity, the faster the results will go. But and again, you touched on this earlier, there is a sales cycle, it can be up to 6 to 12 months. One of the challenges, probably the biggest challenges, is doing this consistently over probably 6 to 12 months, because you can't go, yeah, let's try to drive activity for the next month and then stop. It won't work. You've got to be keeping on top of that. And somebody, Stephen Jelicic, has just asked, what about using technology to better prospect? Absolutely, that's a really good idea. Getting on LinkedIn, getting onto marketing on LinkedIn, and also finding your prospects on there is a really good idea. Don't forget, at some point you have to talk to people. And actually, the earlier you talk to them, the better, because you get in before your competitors do. But absolutely, using technology, using marketing is really important. And sales is about quantity, quality, and skill. If the salesperson, as I said, stays the same, if the quality of the leads stay the same, and you increase the quantity of those leads, you're going to bring more new opportunities that are going to result in more new sales down the track. And that's really what people should be focusing on right now, I think.
I really appreciate what you just said there. Sales is about quantity, quality, and skill. And so it's about working out how best to apply that to this current market. And I just wanted to address that point that Steve's raised there. Steve, I would always say don't use technology as a replacement for an interaction, a personal interaction. Use it as a complement to and as an adjunct to. So almost like a value add. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've got another question for you though, Richard.
Sure.
And I guess this really applies to not just sales teams, but also sales leaders. What do you think that they can do to have their best year? And also, is there a lot that they can do to influence results in this financial year?
Yeah, look, I always think there is something you can do about influencing results this year. If you talk to just one prospect between now and the end of the year, the maximum number of sales you can make is one. If you talk to 100, you're not going to make 100 sales, but you've got more opportunities to make sales. And whilst you may have a sales cycle that might be 6 to 12 months time, if you're out there talking to people today, you may just jag somebody who can make that decision faster. But if you're not out there talking to them, it'll never happen. So I believe you can always influence this year's results. I would be saying that you do everything you can today to influence this year's results. The payoff may come in the next financial year, but doing nothing is going to do nothing for this financial year. So I would be saying use as many channels as you can, sales channels as you can, things that maybe you've used in the past but you've switched off, or things that you've never tried before. I use, and I like the analogy of an iceberg. People rely on online advertising to bring in leads for the sales team through Google AdWords and the like. And I think the people who inhabit that part of the iceberg are the people who are on the tip. They're the people who are actively looking for your product or service right now. But underneath those people are a whole heap of people, a much larger number, who have a problem that you or your product or service can fix, but they either don't know about you or they haven't started looking for that solution yet. They're living with something which is niggling at them. So if you can get out and start communicating with that large bulk of people, engaging them on social media, on LinkedIn, calling them and talking to them, you suddenly open yourself up to a much, much bigger sales channel. And you can do that through LinkedIn, you can do it by groups, you can do it by events if they're running, but you have to be talking to lots of people, not just collecting their names, but actually prospecting and then looking to see where the opportunities are. The other thing is that we talked about salespeople having more time, which is great, but if you don't set KPIs for them, for their activity in whatever areas it is, then that spare time, that extra time will get lost. So setting KPIs for sales activity so that your sales team are using that activity, that extra time to uncover and speak with new potential prospects, and then make sure that that activity is being consistent. It won't be an instantaneous upswing, but that upswing will happen. And as they say, the best time to start a new sales or marketing activity is yesterday. But the second best time to do that is today. So do it today, get round to doing it. Start making those phone calls, those sales calls, getting those meetings, getting proposals sent out, linking with people on LinkedIn, connecting with people, finding the people who are your prospects, make sure they know about you. Do that. If you do that 10% more every day, as you said earlier, Ingrid, it's just a few extra meetings a day. One extra meeting a day will drive a huge number of extra meetings by the end of the year, and that will turn into new sales. So those would be my suggestions for what people can do now to influence results both this year and in the long term too.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said, because I think that I don't think any salesperson can afford to just be myopic in terms of, just generating results for today. But I love what you've just said, of course I do, about the level of activity, because you're going to put yourself in the best position then to make sure that you're giving yourself a head start for the new year. And you might also, like you said, jag upon, some of those opportunities that are really looking for something sooner rather than later. And so they might be unexpected people that you're only going to find if you go looking.
Yeah, true. One of the other things is also and I hadn't thought about this until now, is going back to the account management side. Within your smaller accounts, there will be clients who are only spending 10% of their annual spend on your services with you, or something like that. If you can identify those people and turn them into, so they're starting to spend 30 or 40 or 50%, there's a big upswing there. So it's not all about new business. It's also about what's sitting within your existing clients and what extra work you can get out of those customers. And that will come simply by talking to them and finding out what they're looking for and what else you can do for them.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
So
Now, I suppose we should open it up for questions. Are there any questions from any of the panelists today who, or the attendees today? Anything anybody would like to ask before we wrap up? We've got 5 minutes, I think, before the webinar is due to finish. I'm really keen to finish on time. I think everybody's time is valuable. But if anybody has a question they would like to ask and put onto the chat, please ask now. And we can have a discussion around those. Equally, if it's not about that, Ingrid and I are always looking for ideas for our next webinar. We're holding them deliberately every 2 months, deliberately on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock, and we're going to make that the next one will be in 2 months on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock, 9:30 I should say. But what questions or topics do people want to have covered? If there are any that they would like to have discussed in the next one, please let us know now or after the webinar. And we will provide the recording to everybody in the next couple of days if you want to either share it or rewatch it in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it really matters to us that whatever we're talking about is it comes from either our client base or our networks that really relate to problems that people are having, so that we can discuss them in a way that's going to be helpful and hopefully offer up some new insights so that you can do things in an easier way, in a better way, in a more effective way.
Yes, yes. I think, Stephen, just coming back to your second question is the timing of when you introduce face-to-face into the process. I'm biased, obviously, because that's what we do for a business, but I always feel that you have, in a conversation, you have, in a short period of time, an ability to understand what the person you're talking to, the prospect's needs are, whereas in emails, it can often, or in communication, online communication, it takes longer. It doesn't mean one's better than the other, but I think the conversation trumps that because it's a dialogue, whereas even emails are a monologue. They're a series of monologues between one person and the other, as opposed to an actual dialogue. In terms of platforms to use, there are so many out there. It really depends on what you want to use it for. There are some fairly simple ones. There are some very expensive ones. I would suggest start simple, but think about, does it have the ability to run the marketing off the back of the contacts you want to have in there in a simple way? And is that important to you? If it's not, then I'd stick with a simple CRM. We use Agile CRM for our customer database. We have our own internal piece of software that we use for all the client work that we do. But we use Agile, which is very simple, very easy. In the UK, we use HubSpot. It's very, very powerful. Ingrid, do you have any suggestions or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love HubSpot because I think it's the kind of all singing, all dancing version, which is fantastic. Salesforce obviously has a hell of a lot of functionality, but I feel like they're kind of moving into lots of different directions. So there's a lot of input required and you don't necessarily get a lot back out. Yeah. And I think for salespeople who are not necessarily known for their admin, the simpler the better. So it really needs to be, coming back to what our purpose is, which is to drive more activity and to have better insights, better quality conversations, and therefore better outcomes. And so it's really about finding a CRM that's going to enable your salespeople to have less time in the office, more time in front of people or speaking with people, and using that information to be able to have more targeted conversations. So not just about recording conversations, but about using that information to leverage off.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think we've pretty well come to the end of the webinar again. So thank you, Ingrid. It's always great to see you and catch up and hear your insights on sales and things. And also thank you to all of our attendees today. Thank you very much for joining us. We will let you know about the next one when it's coming up and the topics. If you'd like to write to us individually, my email is richard@fmgroup.com.au. That's F for Forrest, M for marketing. Ingrid, I better let you do yours so I don't get
okay. That's all right. It's just Ingrid@thesalesdoctor. That's thesalesdr.com.au. But if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, which is probably how a lot of you found us in the first place, and direct message me, then we can communicate that way and I can send you all of my contact information that way.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you all very much. We'll send the video out to you in the next few days. Really appreciate you joining us. Ingrid, it's lovely to see you. I know you've got a very busy day today. Good luck, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.